This is the Gonzales story. I would think that this was recorded sometime around 2010, but it's been transcribed almost as a story, not as an interview. Our story begins honoring our mother, Antonia Diaz Gonzales. She was born in 1903 in Villanueva, Zacatecas. She came to the United States when she was 3 years old with our grandparents, Guadalupe Rivera and Leonard Diaz. Our grandmother told us they traveled by car and paid 3 pennies to cross the border in 1906. Once there, they camped by the Rio Grande River near the Yuma State Prison, where she could see armed military-looking men on guard. At the time, we had an aunt and uncle that lived in Los Angeles, and they traveled to Yuma, Arizona to pick up our mom and our grandparents back to Los Angeles. Mom attended school and learned to speak English in L.A. and finally became the family interpreter. We know that Mom and our dad, Victor Villa Gonzales, came to Ventura, but Mom had to have been in her teens. Our grandmother, Guadalupe Rivera, was the first family member to live in Ventura on Mita Street, which is now Thompson Boulevard. So, our mom lived with our aunts, Sally, Lupe, and Uncle Johnny at the time. Sometime between the late 1930s and the early 40s, they all worked hard, saving their money, to buy the property at 135 South Olive Street. It was a back house on the corner of Santa Clara Street and Olive Street. It was a little shack with 2 bedrooms and a small kitchen and a living room on approximately an acre of land. Later, this little shack became our house in the neighborhood of what is known as Tortilla Flats. Our immediate family consisted of 5 girls and 1 boy, Elvira, Rudy, Lucy, Esther, and they were all born in Los Angeles. Juanita and Lupe were born in Ventura. Sadly, after Lupe was born, our parents divorced, and my father went back to Los Angeles. Our lives became more challenging and harder because of the Great Depression and World War II. This is when Guadalupe, our grandmother, had us move in with her at the 135 South Olive Street address. Our mother was now the breadwinner for the family and had to work. She was hired as a dishwasher at the Royce Maddox restaurant on Main Street. Today, it's known as the Busy Bee restaurant. She also worked at the Farad Las Palmas chili factory on Ventura Avenue. That wasn't enough. She had to have also side jobs ironing for the white-collared professionals and the cleaning houses, and she cleaned houses. I remember this beautiful house on the corner of Figueroa and Santa Clara Street. It was a white 2-story house with beautiful banisters, and she would clean that house. I remember Mom saying, "Don't put your hands on that banister. I just polished it." Many women had to sacrifice and be strong in those days, and our mom was no exception. She managed and worked hard all the time. Hard times. Rationing was a way of life during World War II. We saved bottles and foil as a way of getting extra cash. We even rationed women's nylons. The military would use the nylons to make parachutes. Most women in the 40s, they didn't wear slacks or jeans. Ladies wore dresses or skirts. So, when you went downtown to church or to a social gathering, you wore a nice dress, a hat, sometimes gloves, and the women wore nylons. Some women would go the extra length to create the nylon look on their legs using a specific cake makeup, and then they would draw a line on the back of their legs with an eyebrow pencil, creating the illusion of wearing nylon stockings. Looking back at it now, it was amusing to see some of the crooked lines on the back of their legs. There was always some gal who couldn't get that line straight, and she would have this wiggly, crooked line going down the back of her legs. This era of rationing times, we were given food and shoe stamps. If Mom ran short of something, she would trade our neighbors for something they wanted. The Tortilla Flats neighborhood had several victory gardens. It was a way of life to grow your own vegetables and fruit trees. Our grandmother's lot was big, so we were able to grow our own vegetables, and we had numerous fruit trees. Our grandmother's, my mom would always have canned fruit and vegetables in the cupboard. We always had nopales, cactus, made every way you can think of. We had chicken for some meals and hens that laid eggs. Sometimes our uncle or brother went fishing and we would have fresh fish from the Ventura River, or they would go to the beach, clam digging, for fresh clams. Food sharing is what kept the neighborhood alive and together. Our friends and neighbors included the Ayalas, the Laras, and the Barrios. They all lived close to us, and we all shared with one another. When we would have a family or a friend visit, Mom would always go fix something special like enchiladas with rice and beans or a chicken dinner. She would also always chase the plumpest chicken, grab it by the neck, and just turn and snap that bird's neck around and around, then tossed it to the ground. Next, she would sit near the fire pit in the yard and start plucking feathers and toss the bird into a pot of boiling water over the pit to be cooked. We would always get a kick out of seeing those chickens running around the yard without its head. We lived close to what was called Salad Bowl Curve on Mita Street. Back then, Main Street and Mita were the main thoroughfares through town. Truck drivers not familiar with this curve, going at a fast speed, undoubtedly would cause the trucks to roll. The neighborhood would hear the brakes and then the bang from the rollover. It would always be a surprise to see what produce would be spilled out onto the ground. The neighbors would run out with their bags or boxes to grab vegetables and fruit that spilled on the ground and all over the street from the mishap. That is how the curve got its name. Mom made our soap and shampoo, and we rinsed our hair with vinegar, always leaving it squeaky clean. If we had problems with dandruff, Mom would add eucalyptus leaves as an herbal remedy. We would have fun going to Seaside Park to gather up the eucalyptus leaves for her. She would boil the leaves in water outside in our backyard on a fire pit. Mom even made her own glue to put up the wallpaper. Getting new furniture wasn't affordable, so she painted or repainted our wooden furniture to make it look new. She would sit at her Singer sewing machine, bought in 1931, and in working condition to this day, making kitchen linens, aprons, and underwear out of La Piña flour sacks. She would salvage everything, and she was very resourceful. We didn't have the option or luxury of going to a beauty salon. If we needed haircuts, we would just get the scissors and cut each other's hair. Or we would let it grow and wear braids. We always managed to look nice. One time, Lupe wanted to go to a prom, and she knew Mom couldn't afford it. All of her friends were having their dresses made by a popular dress shop called Anita's in Oxnard. A friend, Mary Castillo Diaz, who also lived in the neighborhood, knew the peer pressure about looking nice for the prom. This wasn't going to stop her or Lupe from going to the prom, and she was able to convince Lupe to go. Knowing Mom didn't have money to buy a new dress, luckily, our sister Juanita had been queen for the May procession at Holy Cross School, and Lupe took out that dress and redesigned it to satisfy her taste. Mom helped make a special slip to wear out of a La Piña flower shack. Our wooden shack. Our little house at 135 South Garden Street faces what is now Patagonia. Back then, that building was the Hobson Slaughterhouse. We remember cows grazing to fatten them up, knowing in time they would be slaughtered. One year, there was a bad fire, and you could hear the cries of the animals. It was horrible to hear, and it must have been torture for them trying to escape the flames of that fire. That was a sad, memorable experience. Our little wooden shack had no foundation. It had only 4 rooms. The wooden floorboards weren't sealed close together and had spaces between them, letting us see the earthly dirt below under the house. Mom had only a 2-burner wood stove for cooking and heating. We had an icebox, not a refrigerator. We did have a rotary phone with a shared party line. Sometimes we would pick up the earpiece on the phone and we could hear people talking to each other. That was a signal that we would have to wait until they ended their call to make ours. There wasn't a water heater in our house, so when we needed hot water, we would fill our pails using the water hose. Then we would walk over to the fire pit, set the pails on the fire to heat water for our baths. Once the water was warm, we poured the water into a big galvanized tub for our bath. It seems that years ago, it rained more because we were always saving rainwater. We used it to wash our hair. We could drink it and use it for cooking. Our house was near the tracks from the fork that went to Ojai to gather the oranges and bring them back. When we could hear the train coming, we knew our house was going to rumble. We don't know how that little loving shack made it. The house withstood earthquakes, rain, and floods, but it took the construction of the 101 freeway to bring it down. During the 1930s, there was a flood that went right through Tortilla Flats like a river, and it took a lot of debris through the neighborhood and out to the ocean. City officials had warned all the families to evacuate, but our grandmother wouldn't leave our home. Her canaries were important to her, and to evacuate, no, she wasn't going to leave them. Mom had to take all of us kids, leaving our grandmother behind. Looking back, our mother must have been very concerned about our grandmother's safety. All the people that evacuated were taken to the bathhouse on California Street for the night. The next day, we weren't sure what to expect, and we were relieved to see our little house had escaped the wrath of the water, and our grandmother was just fine. Our yard was a muddy mess, but our little house was intact. Radio was known as the golden age of the radio period, and it was big back in the day. We were lucky to have this wonderful Philco console radio. As a family, we enjoyed listening to music and the different weekly radio programs. For us, this was great entertainment. Remembering our school days. Lupe went to Palm Street Kindergarten. We all went to Holy Cross from 1st grade through 8th grade. Our memorable teachers at Holy Cross were Sister Bernardis, Sister Josefa, and Sister Mary Catherine. Sister Bernardis was the most popular and loving. She coached the boys' sports, and she was an inspiring teacher. Leaving Holy Cross, we went to Cabrillo High School, now known as Cabrillo Middle School, and Ventura College, which is where Ventura High School is now. Fun times during the war. In our teens, we would go to the teen time at the fairgrounds. This was a recreational place for us to hang out. They had a ping pong table and a jukebox. We would meet our friends and other kids there from Oxnard, the Chiques, and Santa Paula, the Santa. During World War II, an army camp was set up at the fairgrounds. Soldiers from all over the nation were stationed there. The barracks were set up in the back of the fairgrounds. It was entertaining to watch them march up and down the road. The fairgrounds was a fun escape and a playground for a lot of us kids before the encampment. The military had a recreational area, and they would have volleyball nets and basketball hoops set up, and we were allowed to play there. During the war, families would have flags set in their windows. The flags represented the family members in the military. If there were men in the military, they would display a flag with just that many stars, each star representing a family member in the service. Our house had 3 stars representing our uncle, our brother-in-law, and our brother. Our brother came back from the war very traumatized. Back then, little was known about post-traumatic stress, but he appeared to have just that. His friends shared that he had been in a foxhole that was hit. He had a concussion with minor wounds, but his buddy was decapitated. When he came home, he wasn't able to get treatment for what they call shell shock at the time, and he became very withdrawn from society. Loud siren posts would go off, and when they went off, that was for an air raid drill. Everyone had to be in their homes and turn off their house lights and pull down black shades. You could not turn on any lights until they sounded the siren again. It was scary being young back then. You never knew if you were really going to be attacked or if it was just a drill. We just had to be prepared. Baseball games were always held at the fairground, and it was very popular back then. Ventura had their own professional team, and we enjoyed going to those games at the fairground. The Mission Theater was something that we looked forward to. It was a lot of fun because they showed chapter movies during the week. So if we were lucky and we had the money, we would enjoy seeing these movies. It was like watching a soap opera on the big screen, and we could hardly wait for the next chapter of the movie. We would save our soda bottles or go searching for empty bottles around the neighborhood to turn them in for cash. With the money that we would get for the bottles, and if it was the first of the month, Mom would also give us a little extra for us to buy some treats at the snack bar. In this particular story, there is a picture of the Ventura baseball diamond, and I'm going to read what it says underneath it. Ventura actually had a baseball stadium. This is 1951, called Babe Ruth Field at 320 South Ventura Avenue, where the Derby Club at the fairgrounds is now, is where it was located. And it was like any stadium, covered seats behind home, seats down both lines, places to eat and concessions. The stadium was painted a dark green. Ventura's team from 1947 to 49 was the Ventura Yankees. And then from 1950 to 1952, they were called the Ventura Braves. And then in 1953, they became known as the Ventura Oilers. Around 1954, the league's franchise was moved to Reno, Nevada. And then the stadium was torn down around 1955. We enjoyed Plaza Park on Santa Clara Street for picnicking or just being around other families and friends having a fun day. Foster Library was another source of entertainment for us. We enjoyed being there and reading a good book. It was a beautiful building, all brick with beautiful climbing ivy all over it. It resembled the old Ventura High School when it was the college. When we were older, Mom would take us girls to the Green Mill Ballroom. Back in the day, in the Mexican culture, it did not allow girls to go out on their own. We had to be escorted or chaperoned. So, Mom and our aunt would take all of us girls. We got to see Harry James and a lot of the popular big bands. Sometimes we would have the opportunity to babysit for these two ladies that lived in an apartment right across the street from the Green Mill. And we would have so much fun just watching all the people going to the Green Mill, all dressed up in their best clothes. The music was loud enough to enjoy from that apartment. Another place that was a great dance hall was the Bathhouse, which later became the Armory. We hung out there, chaperoned, of course. It was a very dressy occasion to go there, and the women and the girls wore formal gowns. We loved the big band sound and just loved to dance. Some Saturday nights, a man that lived in the Shore Acres trailer park would show movies. They would hang up this big white sheet for the screen and show movies outdoors. People would bring their chairs and blankets to sit under the stars. Our family would join the Lara family. They lived in a very small trailer at Shore Acres Park. Shore Acres was also part of the Tortilla Flats neighborhood. Mr. Lara worked for the railroad. Shore Acres was on the north side, closest to the river, and the other side of the tracks. People that lived on the other side were considered very poor. So, if you lived on the other side of the tracks, you truly lived in Tortilla Flats. Shore Acres Trailer Park. There's a picture of it. Another event was the Circus Carnival. There was an empty lot on Mita and Olive Street that was close to our property. When the carnival came into town, they would ask us if they could use some of our water, and in exchange, they would give us free passes. We could go every night to see the show. The empty lot was close to what is known as the Salad Bowl Curve. During the fair days, a lot of us kids from Tortilla Flats would go together. We would sneak in through the back by the train tracks and jump the fence. The Barone family lived close by that area, right next to the railroad tracks. It's amazing their house stood strong with the trains going by all the time. The Ventura River and Hobo Jungle was another playground for all of us kids from Tortilla Flats. It was pretty safe at the time. We would picnic out there and just roam all around and have fun out in nature. We would make our own kites to fly with just paper and twigs. We would get these large nails and put them on the train tracks to get them smashed by the trains. And then we had these nails that were turned into swords to play with. Most of us were creative with what we had, and we had the freedom of roaming around outdoors, not like it is today. We did have to be careful to watch for the ocean tide to cross over to and from Hobo Jungle. Going across it, it would be low tide. Once you crossed it, you were there for most of the day. But as the tide starts coming in, it could get scary. We were small, and we really didn't know how to swim. Well, so we had to make sure that we left before the tide got high. Hard work. When we were old enough to work, we worked during the summer to help our mother. A truck driver from the Orchard Ranch would pick us up, and we rode in this truck, along with other families, to the Connett Ranch. Some families would actually stay and camp at the ranch during the picking season. One of the families that stayed there was the Barrios family. There were 6 of us in our family that worked on the Connett Ranch. We were all allowed to work there with the apricots. Some worked picking, pitting, or boxing apricots. There was this open shed where the workers gathered, and they would give you a sharp knife to split the apricot, take the pit out, and lay it on the tray. Whenever you finished, you would call out, "Tray." Before you started, you were given a punch card, so once you filled the bag, you would get the hole punch on your card, and then you were paid by the number of holes punched in your card. I remember one family would get me so frustrated. I would curse them. I could hear in the distance, "Tray," every 15 minutes. "Tray." We were all working so hard in our little corners. The Connett family and the Connett farm this apricot farm, was kind of below Casitas Springs. My understanding is it's near like where Cañada Larga is, way up the avenue, North Ventura Avenue. That commentary is by me, M.B. Hanrahan. In the mornings, Mom would prepare burritos for us to eat, and we would eat out in the orchard. A lot of times, our burritos were papas, potatoes, beans, and eggs, and they tasted so good. We would make a little fire with the twigs from the walnut wood and heat the burritos until they were nice and warm. Then we worked the walnut season. Again, the Barrios family and the Barone family camped on the Connett Ranch with other families. They were all hardworking families. We all worked together. Every family would take a row of trees, and then we would all have these big sacks to be filled. Well, I was small in stature, and I could only fill it like halfway, and then I would try dragging it along as much as I could. Fortunately, there was always someone to help me out. We worked so hard to get paid for each sack that was filled. We all had numbers assigned to us, and they would put your number on the filled sack, and then at the end of the day, we would be able to count the sacks filled by that person's number. One time, one of my older sisters had not filled her sack, and it was the end of the day, and she called me over to her. Having no idea what she was about to do, she picked me up and put me in the sack and tied it close and told me to be quiet. When the man came to do the count, he counted that sack with me in it, and then he ordered the sack to be put on the truck. Later on, Our mother was looking all over for me and asked my sisters if they knew where I was. And they wouldn't say anything. Then one of my sisters says, "Well, she's over there," pointing to the truck. They had loaded me in the bag onto the truck. Well, we had fun with that one. When it was time to go back to school in September, working with the walnuts, it was embarrassing because our hands were stained black from the walnut shells. We scrubbed our hands hard trying to get those stains off. We used bleach and vinegar, but it just wouldn't wash off. Then we would try so hard to keep our hands hidden and closed because of those black stains, but it's impossible to keep them closed all the time. Eventually, with time, the stains did fade away. Memories of Tortilla Flats were good and bad, happy and sad. The community was an open, sharing society that commingled. Our doors were always open. Not like today. A lot of us don't even know our neighbors and we lock our doors. Life seemed simpler then. Even though we were poor, we were happy with what we had. Neighbors helped one another, shared more, visited each other to have coffee or tea or a burrito. Those were good old days.